If even one nation were unconditionally to perform the supreme act of renunciation, many of us would see in our lifetime visible peace established on earth. Gandhi, May 16, 1936.
Well, we may find this a little hard to believe, but the fact is it has never been put into practice. We've never been put to the test. No nation has stepped back and said, we are going to unilaterally and unconditionally disarm. And there are certain leading nations which create the atmosphere, the environment that others tend to follow. No names, please. And they are among the most militaristic of all. Now, one very courageous nation did do this. That was Costa Rica, and it has been an inspiring example to us in the peace movement, but I don't think we can say that it's caught on in the international community, quote unquote. It would have to be a nation that really has a lot of power to renounce.
And as someone who lived in Costa Rica for many years, it's true that there was a kind of commitment among the populace to nonviolence, which is really surprising to somebody who comes from a different world. And here in this quote, it's 1936, and you can imagine the world is sliding toward World War II. Fascism is rising, imperial powers are arming themselves, and Gandhi is sitting here calling for radical alternatives, unilateral, unconditional renunciation of violence and armaments by even a single nation. And he believed that an act like that would release a transformative moral force, that it would ripple out across the globe. And what is this unconditional renunciation? Like not bargaining, not gradual disarmament, a complete, selfless laying down of arms. And Gandhi believed that truth and nonviolence were stronger than military might. And this single shining example would awaken the conscience of humanity. Peace wouldn't be just a dream, but something tangible, embedded in daily life. And we would all be able to look around, and in the world, there would be an example of that. And I feel like that's often what's needed, is that one example, someone to recognize that it's possible. In Taoism, within the Tao Te Ching, in chapter 46, there's this quote that something like, when the Tao is prevailing in the world, when people are following the Tao, horses are used to fertilize fields. They're out there running around, being happy. But when people aren't following the Tao, when they're not following the way of truth and humanity, war horses instead are bred outside of the city walls, meaning they're about to attack one another. And so it's very important to recognize that the power of an example in the world, if you are to yourself renounce violence, to choose a life of peace, to choose to live happily, and to spread peace and love, to renounce greed and anger and hate, other people see that and they recognize, wow, that I didn't know that was even possible, and it starts to change them. That's what happened for me when I came across an example that suddenly opened my eyes to the possibility, and I've certainly heard it from other people who want to be open to the fact that sometimes all we need is a single example in the world to look around and say, I didn't know that was possible. Maybe there really is a better way.
Nothing should be taught to children by force. Gandhi, Ashram Observances in Action.
Gandhi had a lot to say about education. There are whole booklets available with his ideas on that subject, and quite rightly, because this is critically important. The future human beings that we produce will be shaped partly by how we educate them. Of course, we have to look at the whole picture. The education takes place in the family, then it takes place in formal institutions, but it also takes place nowadays in media, which are not controlled and do not have your best interests at heart. So we need to expand the application of Gandhi's vision, but the principle is still exactly correct.
And there's been so much research done about this that I wish it was taught and expanded upon even more. Of course, Gandhi was a big fan of the person who began the Montessori schooling education, but there's been a number of advances in the science of how to teach children, how to be with each other, how to be cooperative, how to be creative, how to learn in a way that doesn't make them feel stifled. And I just feel like this is something that needs to be talked about more often. Of course, Gandhi was simply expanding upon his own ideas. And in my own opinion, of course, I hope that one of the things that we take a stance against is the indoctrination of children. So much of education these days is centered around telling kids specifically what to think, how to think, and that stunts them and shapes their minds for their whole life, a kind of scarring that happens, rather than allowing their minds to expand, to take the shape based on the world around them. From the Taoist perspective, maybe the shape of the Tao, natural shapes. And so by creating a space within which children are not afraid to learn or to be themselves, where they learn how to communicate, how to relate, how to share, this is a wonderful possibility because, of course, as we know, how we shape ourselves when we're young often has a huge impact on how we are when we're older. And that how one person acts is how communities are formed, communities form nations, nations form world policy.
Happiness has no exchange value. There's no profit from it. And that's from Gandhi to Vinoba by Alonso del Vasto.
This was in the context of a discussion where Gandhi makes the critical point that happiness is inside us, and it's by performing duties, loving our fellow beings, taking up joyfully our responsibility for their well-being, that happiness comes from within, rather than the attempt to create or experience happiness by things we put on or eat or play at from the outside world.
And again, as he's referencing here, when we recognize the value of other things, we recognize the value of dollars, we recognize the value of a position that's obtained, a higher level name. I moved from vice president to president. Wow. When a person or a culture values certain things, then that value tends to spread because we all want to be liked or to be recognized. And instead, what if we put value as a culture and as a people upon happiness, upon contentment, upon peace, upon happy relations? What if somehow we valued that more than we valued cold hard cash? I feel like the world would be very different if we had a kind of stock exchange that recognized those qualities rather than simply the idea of things that add to control and power. And if we can shape a nation around a very different system of values because we measure those values differently, I feel like it would lead to very different outcomes.
I am endeavoring to see God through the service of humanity, For I know that God is neither in heaven nor down below, but in everyone. Gandhi from Truth is God.
I think Gandhi would accept this minor correction that yes, God is actually in heaven and everywhere else, but we cannot find her there. And there's an English mystic, William Law, says, though God is everywhere present, he is only present to you in the inmost depths of your soul.
And what a different world it would be if religions sought for their God inside and within each other, rather than in some distant place that they maybe have to die to reach. But rather, if we looked at each other and we saw fragments of whatever God it is that they follow shining through the eyes of their loved ones. They looked inside during meditation and contemplation and prayer, and they found the light of their God shining from within as an act of love and truth. How different would our world be? How would we shape our politics? What would our religions look like? How would we treat each other?
It is no nonviolence if we merely love those who love us. It is nonviolence only when we love those who hate us. Gandhi from the book All Men Are Brothers.
Again, we're seeing that violence in behavior, in external behavior, is its least expression. That's a direct quote from him. Violence and nonviolence arise from within us. They begin with our own struggle against our anger and fear, and then are expressed outwardly towards other beings. It just does not hurt to keep on being reminded of this, because speaking for myself, we easily forget it.
Yeah, too often we recognize that violence happens outside us. People are violent toward us. And if we can recognize that violence is also something that begins with inside us, with our thoughts, with our intentions, with our bad habits and actions, that's one of the places that we can start to quell this wave of violence that is always surrounding us, these ripples of violence that spread. And if we can only find ourselves loving the people who love us and who treat us well, rather than learning to love, period, just to love, to be loving. And to be love means to express that in everything that we do, everything that we say, this love and compassion, this deep contentment that we develop through practice. And then, as we see here, we recognize, as Gandhi might say, that all men are brothers. All human are family. We're all in this boat together as sentient beings. And together, that boat rises and falls, not one at a time, but all together.
I have learned through bitter experience the one supreme lesson to conserve my anger. Gandhi, Young India, September 15th, 1920.
It is so rightly said that this is the one supreme lesson. Think what's involved here. We tend to feel either guilty or self-righteous about our anger. And those are both useless and actually harmful attitudes. When we get the ability to look upon our anger as a force, as a kind of energy that we can deal with, channel into creative uses, it's incredibly liberating. I am speaking here from personal experience.
Agreed that recognizing the world as Qi, that everything has movement and vitality and life to it. Qi is this wonderfully catch-all term. We can use it for whatever we need. And when emotional energy is moving, when Qi is rising, if it's trapped, if it's stuck, if it's blocked, if it explodes, if it's channeled through a bitter heart, then what we experience is anger. But there's another way. That same Qi can be harnessed, channeled, used like any energy can. And when it's channeled instead through compassion, through an open heart, through this courageous quality that humans have the capacity for, then it becomes something different, and it's no longer damaging. It's no longer injurious to the people around us. It doesn't generate more negativity, more violence. Instead, it becomes something better. And of course, we don't want to live on that. It's still exhausting if we try to be in that state all the time. It's only for moments of great necessity. And that's another reason to learn to be quiet and content, rather than to always be in this space, because we will just burn out. And so I think that's part of what Gandhi here is recognizing, a young Gandhi here, is recognizing that he spent too much of his life angry, and it had burned him out. So he needs to conserve that energy and to be using it only in the moments when it really needs. And I would add that in those moments it stops being what we can call anger, if we define anger as something that damages us, to being something more wholesome, expressive, directed, and powerful, and healing.
Human life is a series of compromises, and it is not always easy to achieve and practice what one has found to be true in theory. Gandhi from the mind of Mahatma Gandhi.
Yeah, I think there are 2 points here. The necessity for us to be willing to compromise really reduces the level of hostility in any dispute or conflict situation. When we go into a situation saying, I must have everything that I want, that means conflict is inevitable. The other point that he's making, though, is a very important one in Vedanta philosophy and other systems, and that is it's very important for us to be aware of the ideal, even though we will never find the ideal completely realized before us in the practical, in the real world. Elsewhere, Gandhi says, it's like Euclid's line in geometry. There's no such thing as a perfectly straight line with no dimensions in the physical world, but it's a critically important concept nonetheless.
What a great example, Euclid's line, that in theory we have this perfectly straight line, but in the real world, on our planet, for instance, a perfectly straight line curves as it goes around the surface of the planet. And that's the kind of compromise that we require to make if we're going to make a straight line for a building on our planet. If I was to make a very large building, if we were making the Large Hadron Collider, it's so big that I have to account for the curvature and to dig into the ground and to make a difference, because the world is round. And even though on paper, if I'm drawing that out in a sketch, I need to have straight lines in my blueprint, I still have to recognize that the experience of the world is different than what's going on in my head. And I think that part of what Gandhi here is saying, that we go into a negotiation and we might demand some ideal or idealized version of something. And we have to recognize that this is human life and compromises need to be made. And we can't always have perfectly what we want. And so instead, we accept what we can and we keep moving forward toward a better world.
A satyagrahi goes to prison, not to embarrass the authorities, but to convert them by demonstrating to them his innocence. Gandhi, November 5th, 1938.
I think Gandhi would accept a slight modification here. There is a role for making one's opponent a bit embarrassed about what he or she is doing. The critical thing is not to make a person feel shame about who they are, but about what they are doing. In fact, what you want to do is the opposite of that. Say to a person, in effect, how could you have done that? Or, I'm surprised at you, not there you go again.
It's been fascinating to come to understand that all people, even the people doing the worst travesties in history, seem to review their own lives and see themselves as the good guy, as the hero in the story. Every person sees themselves as doing the right thing or doing what they have to do in a bad situation. Nobody really looks at themselves and sees themselves as the villain in the story. And that is really eye-opening, because I'm so used to the caricatures that I've found in Hollywood and stories that I was told as a kid. There's always the evil person, tapping their fingers together, stroking their goatee with their black hat and saying, ha ha ha, here I am. For the sake of evil, I will destroy these people. And of course, that's not what real life is like. Everybody has their own motivation, their own process that they're going through, their own healing, and their own injuries that they're suffering from. It's this epidemic of the infection of violence spreading through people and making them feel worse and worse and doing terrible things. And so recognizing that, then we can take any person doing any level of harm, and if we can get them to self-reflect, which is certainly a skill, then maybe we can get them to say to themselves, why am I doing this? Is this really what I want to be doing? Rather than seeing someone as some black and white caricature of good and bad, we can recognize people, humanity, and that this person doing the harm is just the same as us. And what would we need in order to wake out of this nightmare that they're living, enacting violence upon the world in small and in big ways? And then they can make the transformation on the inside. They can open their own heart. And together we can heal, because when we're trying to heal the whole world, that includes the people that are doing the harm. We also have to heal them too.
I have, after much prayerful consideration and after very careful examination of the government's standpoint, pledged myself to offer satyagraha against the bills, and invited all men and women who think and feel like me to do likewise. Gandhi, in a speech made at Madras on March 18, 1919.
1919 was a key and intense moment in the first phase of satyagraha. And I think what's noteworthy here is his respect for the government's position. He could have just rejected it out of hand. Where would that have led? Only to mutual recrimination and defensiveness. So Gandhi typically and always operated with respect for his opponent, and that gave him a tremendous amount of leverage. The idea being you didn't want to force them, you wanted to induce them to do things from their own will because they see your point of view. And this can only be brought about, usually, often unfortunately, by a certain kind of self-suffering.
And what a high level of skill that must require to be in the midst of that space, a government standoff, asking them to allow your people to have food or basic rights, and you're talking to people who see you as an animal or who are willing to injure your family to make a point. And you continue to open your heart, you continue to see them as a person, you continue to give them the opportunity to heal and to be their own better people. Because of course, again, that's the point. We need to include everybody in our circle of satyagraha, our own circle of healing and compassionate action. But I don't want to skip past the fact that there's people in the world who are able to do this in the most difficult of circumstances. And I feel like we often hold up heroes of war and generals and great warriors who killed many, many people. But when we're speaking of heroic action, can we not hold this kind of activity up with awe and reverence and say, wow, there are people that do this too?
Nonviolent action without the cooperation of the heart and the head cannot produce the desired result. Gandhi, Mahatma, Volume 5.
As mentioned earlier, you can act in a nonviolent way, but not really feel it, not really have empathy for the opposition. This is something that we very easily fall into. But when we do that, the mere external observance of nonviolence, which, let it be added, is any day better than the external observance of violence, is nonetheless not going to have its full effect. And we should be aware of that, because people often think, well, I went in there, I didn't hold a weapon, I didn't curse anybody, and it still didn't work. Well, it didn't work because it wasn't complete.
And what an interesting way for him to frame that this combination of the heart and the head is what makes for complete nonviolent action. An activist that's out there doing the right actions, distributing flyers, educating the public, making change, whatever it is that they're choosing to do as active protest or to help bring about a better world, it may be incomplete unless it includes all of them. If they're still hateful and resentful inside their heart, then perhaps that is also coming through in their action. And that, of course, as we learn from the Buddha and from what Gandhi is teaching here, those deep intentions matter just as much as the actions. And so if we can cultivate these spaces of deep intention, then it changes the world around us. And to recognize that even from this Taoist perspective, that which makes a sage, that which makes a change maker in the world, someone who transforms themselves and the space around them, is something that comes from the inside and then flows outward. And that's what makes maybe we can say, a complete activist, a complete person of peace.
I am but a humble explorer of the science of nonviolence. Its hidden depths sometimes stagger me just as much as they stagger my fellow workers. Gandhi, Young India, November 20th, 1924.
Gandhi is doing two things here. One, being humble, which was just his natural state. But other than that, and more importantly, telling us once again that nonviolence is a profound, deep principle of reality, probably the principle upon which all of the universe has come into existence. And therefore, just to think that it's a question of a technique or even a kind word instead of a harsh one, all of which is very good, it only gives us a hint at the incredible depths of the power of nonviolence.
And how do we start to learn more about these hidden depths? He calls himself a humble explorer. And I think it's true that if this science of nonviolence, as we're calling it, is just in its beginning phases, like any science, that means there are hidden depths to explore. There's deeper levels of understanding for us to learn about this. And I personally find it very inspiring to think of this as a science, to think of this as something that I could go to school for and learn about and recognize, wow, people have really done this work before. And look, here's what works best. Here's how we can make this better. Oh, look, this researcher of the science of nonviolence discovered that when this quality is enhanced, or when you have this number of people engaged in the process, then suddenly the effectiveness changes at this level. Oh, that negotiation didn't work. Maybe it's because this quality wasn't there, or maybe something else was missing. And to continue to get better at that, to pay attention, to recognize there's a way that we can get better at this and move forward, because we have spent millennia studying the science of war and the science of violence and weaponry. We have engineers that spend their lives thinking about the aerodynamics of missile flight and how to best spread shrapnel in a way that injures as many civilians as possible. People can get a degree in that. How much more so if we pay attention to an act of kindness, and we start to pay attention to how that affects the people around us. We learn, we actually can quantify mathematically how the development of compassion in our own lives affects the countryside around us. How amazing would that be if we actually had that information? Maybe people would feel more inspired to train and to learn and to heal themselves, because they would start to recognize the level of effectiveness here. And so in a way, Gandhi is just a humble explorer, a beginner of this process. But maybe he made it codified enough so that people like Michael Nagler would come in as a professor and say, let's write this down. Let's share it with people, and together we will allow this science to blossom.
My experience has taught me that the law of progression applies to every righteous struggle. But in the case of satyagraha, it amounts to an axiom. Gandhi, Satyagraha in South Africa.
I believe the law of progression means that when you do something that is correct, correctly aimed and with the correct means, forces will accrue to you. Now, that might be in the form of followers. And we look at the graphic illustration of the Salt March. He starts off with 70 people from his ashram, and it's about 70,000 by the time he gets down to Dandin 12 days later. When we do something wrong, harmful, actually, despite appearances, our power diminishes. When we do something correct, the whole universe resonates with it, and our efforts are enhanced.
And again, this is something that a science of nonviolence would be able to quantify, to pay attention to. Because this law of progression that he's talking about is something that everybody who engages in these struggles will experience. And we all experience it in our lives. There's a famous quote from Gurdjieff which says something like, when I fully commit myself to a cause or to a movement or to an action, it's as though all of heaven and earth muster behind me to help make that happen. And Gandhi might add that as long as that decision, that movement through you is happening based on this law of peace and nonviolence, the laws of nature, the laws of love, movement with the Tao rather than against it, then of course, when you're moving with the flow of the river, it's as though the whole river is pushing behind you. And I feel, again, that the more people we have paying attention to this, talking about it, sharing and spreading this possibility, the more as a people we will take it seriously and teach about it in schools and begin to maybe one day shape a whole nation around it, the whole world.
We want to reach not the dead level, but unity and diversity. Gandhi from Yuravda Mandir.
Again, a critically important principle here. It is sometimes mistakenly believed that by economic or other criteria, what we want is to make everybody the same. That was anathema to someone who was brought up in the atmosphere that Gandhi enjoyed. Rather, we want each individual to be exactly where and who he or she was destined to be. So that means that what we're doing is much more like a growth process in nature than an artificially manufactured uniformity.
And that again calls me back to Michael's statement that externally, that's where diversity happens. Internally, we recognize our humanity. We recognize that we're all the same. We're all part of this same family. We're all in the same boat together. And to recognize that strength of diversity, the unity within the diversity, but to recognize that we're all different. We all can be allowed to flourish. We can all be allowed to become our best selves. And the ecosystem that arises from that is not only diverse, but it's strong and resilient. It's flexible and capable of producing new things. And we want to allow for that rather than a tight control of the people. We allow every heart to express itself individually, every person's spirit to flourish and flower, and to build a world around that. Gosh, what would that look like?
It is the acid test of nonviolence that in a nonviolent conflict there is no rancor left behind, and in the end the enemies are converted into friends. It's Gandhi from Mahatma, Volume 4.
This is why when we try violence and it seems to work and we get bedazzled by the fact that it, quote, worked, unquote, what we end up doing really is lurching from failure to failure. Whereas when we act in a truly nonviolent spirit, with truly nonviolent policy and implementation, that there are benefits which we hadn't even anticipated. And I think any of us who have really acted in nonviolence have been very pleasantly surprised by that phenomenon. And it's again proof that what we're doing has the arc of the universe on its side, as Martin Luther King would put it.
Yeah, that arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And if we were to imagine a world where everybody gets along, if the world is filled with peace, nonviolence, if everyone sees each other as shared humanity and we're all willing to work together, where everyone are friends, nobody's an enemy, then clearly, in order to get there, or at least to move the world in that direction of the ideal, then we cannot leave every conflict creating another enemy. Every negotiation that we leave where somebody is left worse off, or we take advantage of something, we get away with it, and we say, he, I won, we have left the world in a worse place. We are further away from our goal than we were before. It's clear and obvious, which means we need to learn to use methods that make friends instead of enemies, that build relationships rather than destroy them. It seems like a pretty obvious direction, but it's amazing how shocking it can be when you live in a world where everyone thinks that in order to become happy, they have to take from somebody else, recognizing that that's part of what destroys their happiness. We must create a world where we all come together. That is the only way through.
A nation which allows itself to be influenced by the fear of death cannot attain Swaraj and cannot retain it if somehow attained. Gandhi from Navajivan, October 1921.
The first step for any individual who wanted to be a real satyagrahi was to shed fear. Gandhi said that very often. And he also said that it is blasphemy to believe that what's possible for the individual is not possible for the collective. So because one individual can be perfectly nonviolent, that shows that the world could be a nonviolent place.
Always so inspiring. This reminds me of the Buddhist statements, the Four Noble Truths, of that suffering is a thing. Suffering is caused by something. We can learn about what suffering is. We can learn what it's caused by. We can recognize that there's a way out of suffering. There are methods to do it, and that there are people that have used these methods. Basically, we can recognize that, hey, look, such a thing as suffering exists. And we can actually point at people that have done the work, this very clear path to set free of suffering, to get loose of that, to become contented and free. And if we can recognize that those possibilities exist, that means that anyone can become free. And to me, that was incredibly helpful when I was younger, recognizing, oh, it's not just special people, one in a zillion, but rather anyone can become free of suffering. And I feel like this is what he's talking about. If any one person can become free of fear, if that's the first step in becoming a true activist of nonviolence, and we say, well, I can't do that. But then we look around and we see, well, there are definitely people who have. And that means anybody can. And to recognize that quality, that possibility within yourself, and that possibility within the world, once again, can you imagine a society that is free of those qualities? What would that look like? What world would that blossom into? And how could we all not want to strive toward that together? But we start with us.
Western democracy, as it functions today, is diluted Nazism or fascism. Gandhi, May 18, 1940.
This is a serious accusation, and it really makes us think here we are fighting fascism for democracy. But his point over and over again, very well made, is that if we use the tools of fascism, namely violence, then we are really in the end just contributing to it. And he had harsh things to say about not the principle of democracy, which was a sacred principle for him, as it is, I think, for most of us, but rather that in the fair name of democracy, we have perpetuated a number of inequitable and violent systems. And for example, majority rule means the minority is going to be in some way suppressed. So that merely mechanistic concept of democracy, just by vote counting, is not going to realize that beautiful principle.
It's a pretty harsh statement from Mr. Gandhi there. And I can certainly see where he is coming from. The atrocities that have been committed, that are being committed in the name of freedom, in the name of justice, they are terrible to contemplate. And any system which is based upon that, any system which has that capacity to say this is for justice and freedom, and then to commit the worst things imaginable by humans, clearly there's something wrong. So maybe there's something to what Gandhi is saying here.
Interdependence is and ought to be as much the ideal of humanity as self-sufficiency. Gandhi, Young India, March 21st, 1929.
Be it noted that even in the great struggle for Swaraj, which meant the political independence from India, it did not mean a cessation of the relationship between India and Britain, but rather an alteration of that relationship from one of domination to one of equality, where each nation could contribute its specific contribution, its own genius.
Once again, that idea that even with children, we allow them to grow and to flower into the best version of themselves, whatever that looks like, not trying to control the outcome of that. And the idea of self-sufficiency in the same way that as a nation, we are our best selves, that the multitude of spaces and cultures and societies on the planet, big and small, each have their own style, their own flavor, their own way of being. And if allowed to flower through, of course, love and compassion, not through violence and hatred, but if allowed to grow and become their best selves, then they contribute to the world in a unique and startlingly beautiful way. Again, in the same way that within any ecosystem, the diversity is its strength. And so recognizing that quality of interdependence then, that within an ecosystem, the diverse range of things growing there, they're actually still dependent upon each other. That we keep discovering that when one small insect becomes extinct in a local area, that half of the local population dies off because they were all linked together in a chain of resilience and reliance. And it's the same thing with our human ecosystem, that it is our independence, it is our unique qualities, it is our ability to become a brilliant different color flower for each of us that allows us to become resilient in a changing world and to think of new things and try new ways of being. And so we want to allow both the relationships between each other, that we rely on each other to survive, and also we don't control how each individual person blossoms and becomes their best self.
The possession of anything then became a troublesome thing to me and a burden. Gandhi, Young India, April 30th, 1925.
Here we see Gandhi applying in his personal life one of the cardinal principles of spirituality as outlined in Vedanta or any other truly spiritual tradition, that we don't really possess anything. And it was from this attitude that he developed his famous concept, which solves so many problems, of trusteeship. Because you don't have to give away your possessions, you don't have to dispossess others of their possessions. You just have to inculcate an attitude that what you have is a tool for the benefit of others, not a status symbol or an instrument of satisfaction or anything like that.
As I make my way through this teaching series with Michael and Gandhi, I have been learning a lot. I hope that you are as well. Please write down in the comment section what you've been learning. And I am very struck by this idea that was introduced in an earlier episode, that if we can shift our perspective from ownership to trusteeship, to stewardship, then we discover that everything in life gets better, as Michael was mentioning. And I feel like that is a really wonderful internal shift to make. And I'm going to make certain that that is something that is a clean transformation in my life as well, because I feel the truth in that. And again, if you spend any time in a monastery or around people that are spending all of their time cultivating and talk to people, what you'll find is they feel the same way, that this idea of ownership, of complexity and clutter in our lives is actually something that is a burden. It's not a gift. It's something to be avoided, not sought after. And so take a note of advice from these people that are always considered to be the happiest and freest people on earth, and recognize that the things that you own begin to own you. And so if we can become free of that habit and shift our mindset toward trusteeship, as Michael and Gandhi here are recommending, I feel like this is a wonderful shift that we can make in our own lives and maybe one day in a culture.
Power rightly exercised must sit light as a flower. No one should feel the weight of it. It's from Gandhi in a book called Mahatma Gandhi, The Last Phase.
This series, edited by Pyarlal, is very, very rich. And in this particular comment, he's again outlining that we don't have to dispossess ourselves of physical possessions or the influence that we may exert over others. It's simply making sure that we do not feel that we're personally attached to it and that it is to be used for the benefit of all.
And I feel like this is wonderful advice for anybody who finds themselves in a position of power or great wealth, or just power over other people, that if they begin to allow that to shape them, if it weighs heavily on their shoulders and it shapes who they are, they begin to bend under that pressure. Greed begins to appear, or narcissism, or strange behaviors and thoughts. It shapes your heart differently. Then clearly you are in an unhealthy space. But rather, if that power, as he's mentioning here, sits lightly upon your shoulders like a flower, then that means that you are able to maintain your upright and dignified stance in life. You are still free. You are not restrained by that need for power. You're not going to start making choices that you wouldn't otherwise make in a more free situation. And I feel as though this is something that leaders everywhere should take very seriously, because as I mentioned before, I feel as though it is a kind of poison, a toxin that damages people in great power. Power corrupts. Money poisons. And if we can recognize sufficiency, we know when we have enough. I have enough money now. I have enough wealth. I no longer need more. I'm okay now. And more just I can then distribute to the poor. I can help people in the world. I don't need to continue to accumulate. I have enough power. I can say what I need, and what needs to get done happens. I don't need to try to forever accumulate more power or protect it. Instead, it just rests as lightly as a flower upon my life, and I'm able to sit and rest in this upright, dignified way, free of worries and free of those poisons and toxins that come from these positions that we might not be prepared for. May we all be like Mahatma Gandhi in those positions of power.
Habit is not nature. Gandhi, and that's from the Gita according to Gandhi.
Our natural state would be one of complete spontaneity, where we respond in a fresh way to every event, every interaction, every person, and there be nothing habitual. Now, of course, that doesn't mean we should get rid of habits. He's just trying to point out that we can exercise discriminating control over our habits. And this would apply above all to the habit of being angry or violent, which is both a personal and a societal illness. There is some kind of impulse inside of us that leads to it, but expressing it in a violent, destructive way, that is habit, and that can be retrained.
Taoist studies, we learn that there are a number of kinds of human nature. For instance, there's the part of us, the inherited nature, which comes from, let's say, our parents and our culture, the thing what came to us that we had no hand in, our genetics, for instance. There are people who genetically are more likely to become angry or more likely to feel depressed. These are inherited natures, 病性. And there's also the habitual nature, the part of our life that we do it because we've always done it that way, for whatever reason. We sit a certain way because we copied somebody else who sat that way when we were 10, and now we still sit that way. And because we sit that way, our spine slowly curves, our hips get tight, we have headaches every day. These are habits. This habitual nature is something that can be changed and can be shaped. And I feel like there's great power in recognizing that. And within Taoism, there's also awakening nature, transformative nature, these qualities that allow us to become our better selves. If we can awaken those qualities inside us, which are shaped around love, which are shaped around peace and relationship and healing, then those qualities of awakening nature, that transformative quality, begins to shape your habitual nature. And you habitually become somebody who is kind. You habitually become somebody who is compassionate and free. And this is what our home practices are shaped around, reshaping those qualities of habit, whether it's through posture, because of course the way we do anything is the way we do everything, the habit of breath, the habit of our thought process, how we speak to the people in our lives. So we go out and we study nonviolent communication methods, and we shift the habit of our speech. So now in our everyday communications, we're no longer causing offense. We're no longer stimulating competition and bad feelings. But instead, we leave everybody feeling a little bit better. And these tiny habits that fill our days by the thousands and thousands, each one rippling outward, generating more peace, more compassion in the space around you. And of course, you are part of that ripple. So you become more compassionate, more kind, more attentive. And a little bit at a time, simply through habits, simply through changing how we do things in our day-to-day, starting small, but ending and hopefully making a difference in our entire community, we can make these changes. And you can make these changes. So right now, take the time, adjust your posture, let go of your breath, quiet your mind a bit if it was being anxious or agitated. If you have the chance, reach out to somebody close to you and just express a little bit of love. Feel how that shifts your heart. And make that something that you do every day. So simple, so powerful.